The auction block stood in the center of Fort Sumner's trading post, and Teresa Zimmerman felt the weight of every eye in the room as the blizzard howled outside like a wild animal trying to claw its way through the walls. She had never imagined her life would come to this, standing beside 3 other women while men shouted numbers and examined them like cattle. But desperation had made monsters of good people during the winter of 1878, and her uncle had sold her to pay his gambling debts without a second thought. The rope burns on her wrist still stung from where he had bound her that morning, dragging her through knee-deep snow to this God-forsaken place while she screamed and fought. But no one in this frontier town seemed to care about the protests of a 20-year-old woman with no family left to protect her. Owen Armstrong stood at the back of the crowded room, his hat pulled low over his eyes as he watched the proceedings with growing disgust. He had come to Fort Sumner to buy supplies before heading back to his ranch 15 miles north, not to witness human beings sold like property. But the storm had trapped everyone in town, and the auction had drawn every lonely prospector, rancher, and drifter looking for cheap labor or worse. At 26, Owen had seen his share of ugly things during his years working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. But this turned his stomach in ways that gunfights and stampedes never had. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man named Galloway with tobacco-stained teeth, grabbed Teresa's arm and yanked her forward. "Now here's a fine specimen, gentlemen. Young, strong, can cook and clean. The man who takes this one home won't regret it, I guarantee." Teresa jerked her arm away, her dark eyes blazing with fury despite the fear that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "I am not property. My uncle had no right to sell me like some horse or piece of furniture." Galloway backhanded her across the face, and the crack echoed through the room. "Shut your mouth, girl. Nobody wants to hear your complaints." Owen's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip before he forced himself to relax. Starting a gunfight in a room full of armed men would get everyone killed, including the girl he suddenly felt compelled to help. He studied her more carefully now, noting the way she held herself straight despite the red mark blooming on her cheek, the defiance that burned in her gaze even as tears threatened to spill over. She had brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, tangled from rough treatment, and her simple gray dress was torn at the hem where she had clearly tried to run. "We will start the bidding at $50, Galloway announced, and several hands shot up immediately. Owen felt sick as the numbers climbed. $60, $70, $85. The men shouting bids had hunger in their eyes that had nothing to do with needing help around a homestead, and he knew exactly what fate awaited this girl if one of them won. He thought of his sister back in Missouri, safely married to a good man, and wondered what he would want someone to do if she had ever found herself in such circumstances. $200, Owen called out, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. The room fell silent, heads turning to stare at him. $200 was more money than most of these men saw in 6 months, an outrageous sum for human cargo. Galloway's eyes widened with greedy delight while Teresa searched the crowd for the source of the bid, her gaze finally landing on the tall cowboy in the back. $200 going once, Galloway said quickly, clearly hoping no one would challenge such a high offer. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Owen pushed through the crowd, his boots heavy on the wooden floor as men stepped aside. Up close, he could see Teresa trembling, though whether from cold, fear, or rage he could not tell. Probably all 3. He pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat and counted out the money, each gold coin a reminder that he had just spent half his savings on a stranger. "Pleasure doing business with you," Galloway said, reaching for Teresa's arm to hand her over like goods. Owen grabbed the man's wrist before he could touch her. "I will handle it from here." His voice carried a warning that made Galloway step back, and Owen turned to Teresa. "Madam, I need you to come with me. I promise I mean you no harm, but we need to get out of this place before the storm gets worse." Teresa searched his face, looking for any sign of the cruelty she had seen in the other bidders. His eyes were gray like winter clouds, and weathered lines around them spoke of years spent outdoors. But there was something solid and honest in his expression that made her want to trust him, even though every instinct screamed that trusting men had brought her nothing but misery. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I just spent $200 I could not afford to keep you away from those animals," Owen said quietly, jerking his head toward the other bidders who watched with undisguised resentment. "And because if we do not leave right now, someone might decide to challenge the sale with bullets instead of bids." That logic penetrated Teresa's fear, and she nodded once. Owen removed his heavy sheepskin coat and draped it over her shoulders before guiding her toward the door with a hand that barely touched the small of her back, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. The other men muttered threats and curses as they passed, but no one dared confront Owen directly. He had a reputation in these parts as a fair man who avoided trouble, but also as someone you did not want to cross if you valued your health. The blizzard hit them like a physical blow the moment they stepped outside. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, driven by wind that howled down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains to the north. Teresa gasped and pulled Owen's coat tighter around herself, but the thin dress beneath offered almost no protection from the cold that seemed to reach right through to her bones. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since morning, and visibility extended maybe 10 feet at best. "My horse is at the livery," Owen shouted over the wind, keeping a firm grip on Teresa's arm now to prevent them from getting separated. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Teresa called back, though in truth she had only ridden a handful of times and never in conditions like this. The livery stable sat at the far end of Fort Sumner's Main Street, and the walk that should have taken 3 minutes stretched into an eternity of stumbling through snowdrifts and fighting the wind that tried to knock them off their feet. By the time Owen hauled open the heavy door and pulled Teresa inside, her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue and tasted blood. The stable offered blessed relief from the wind, though the cold still seeped through every gap in the walls. 6 horses occupied the stalls, including Owen's bay gelding, a sturdy animal named Gunpowder who had carried him thousands of miles over the past 4 years. The stable hand, a Mexican boy named Miguel, looked up from mucking stalls with surprise. "Mr. Armstrong, you are not planning to ride out in this weather, are you?" Owen shook snow from his hat and ran a hand through his dark blonde hair, considering their options. The smart thing would be to wait out the storm in town, but Fort Sumner only had one hotel, and it would be packed with travelers trapped by the blizzard. The thought of spending the night surrounded by the men from that auction made his skin crawl, and he imagined Teresa felt the same way multiplied tenfold. His ranch had shelter, supplies, and most importantly, distance from this place. "I have weathered worse," Owen lied, though in truth he had never attempted to ride through a blizzard this fierce. "Miguel, I need you to saddle Gunpowder and any other horse strong enough to carry a rider in heavy snow." Miguel hesitated, clearly thinking Owen had lost his mind, but the $2 silver Owen pressed into his palm overcame his objections. While the boy prepared the horses, Owen turned to Teresa, who had sunk onto a hay bale and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook, and he realized she was crying silently, all the terror and humiliation of the day finally overwhelming her now that she had a moment to breathe. Owen crouched in front of her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Miss, I know you have no reason to trust me, and I cannot imagine what you have been through today. But I need you to hold yourself together for a few more hours. My ranch is about 15 miles north, and if we can make it there, you will have a warm bed, hot food, and my word that no one will hurt you. Can you do that?" Teresa looked up at him through red-rimmed eyes, and something in his steady gaze gave her the strength to nod. "I do not even know your name." "Owen Armstrong, and yours?" "Teresa Zimmerman." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her face. "Where is your ranch?" "In the foothills near Fort Bascom, following the Canadian River. It is not much, just a cabin and a barn with about 50 head of cattle, but it is mine and it is safe." Owen stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, Miguel has the horses ready." The boy had saddled Gunpowder and a sturdy roan mare named Rosie who belonged to the livery, but could be rented for the right price. Owen paid Miguel extra to cover the rental and potential loss if the weather turned deadly, then helped Teresa mount the mare. Her hands shook as she gripped the saddle horn, and Owen could see the fear in her eyes as she contemplated riding into the storm. "Stay close to me," he instructed, swinging up onto Gunpowder with practiced ease. "If visibility gets too bad, we will find shelter and wait it out. Do not try to be brave. If you are struggling, tell me immediately." "Understood, understood," Teresa echoed, though her voice lacked conviction. They rode out of Fort Sumner heading north, and within minutes the town disappeared behind them in a wall of white. The wind screamed across the open plains, driving snow into their faces like tiny knives. Owen kept Gunpowder at a steady walk, constantly checking over his shoulder to make sure Teresa remained close behind. The mare followed gamely, her head lowered against the wind. The landscape had transformed into something alien and hostile. Familiar landmarks vanished under snow, and the temperature continued to plummet as darkness approached. Owen navigated by instinct and memory, keeping the wind at their backs and following the general slope of the land northward. His face went numb first, then his hands despite his thick gloves, and he knew Teresa must be suffering far worse in her inadequate clothing. After 2 hours of slow progress, Owen spotted a dark shape emerging from the white chaos. An abandoned shepherd's hut, one he had used for shelter during spring roundup. The structure leaned precariously and half the roof had caved in, but one corner remained intact enough to provide protection from the worst of the storm. "In here," Owen called, dismounting and leading Gunpowder toward the hut. Teresa followed, so stiff with cold that Owen had to lift her bodily from the saddle. She could barely stand, her legs refusing to support her weight after the brutal ride, and Owen half carried her inside while the horses waited with patient misery. The interior smelled of rot and animal droppings, but the intact corner blocked the wind, and that made it paradise. Owen settled Teresa against the one solid wall, then went back out to tend the horses. He stripped the saddles and brought them inside along with the blanket rolls tied behind each saddle, then positioned the horses where they would provide a windbreak for the damaged section of roof. Teresa watched through a haze of exhaustion as Owen worked with efficient competence. He moved like someone who had survived countless rough nights on the trail, wasting no motion. When he returned inside, he spread one blanket on the dirt floor and gestured for Teresa to sit, then wrapped another around her shoulders before taking the remaining blanket for himself. "I am sorry about the accommodations," Owen said, settling beside her with enough space between them to avoid impropriety. "This is not exactly the warm cabin I promised." "It is better than that auction block," Teresa said, her teeth still chattering. "Or whatever those men were planning for me tonight." Owen reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a tin of sardines, some hardtack, and a small flask of whiskey. Not much of a meal, but it would keep them alive until morning. He opened the sardines and offered them to Teresa first, but she shook her head. "I cannot. I think I might be sick if I try to eat. You need to get something in your stomach. Just try a bite." Owen's voice carried a note of command softened by concern, and Teresa found herself obeying. The fish tasted like brine and oil, but warmth spread through her chest as she swallowed. Owen ate sparingly himself, then took a small sip from the flask before offering it to her. "This will help with the cold." Teresa had never drunk whiskey before. Her mother had been a strict Methodist who preached against alcohol with the same fervor she brought to sermons about hellfire and damnation. But her mother was dead 5 years now, killed by the influenza that had swept through Missouri, and Teresa was well past caring about propriety. She took the flask and drank, then immediately choked as the liquid burned her throat. Owen patted her back until she stopped coughing. "Easy. Small sips." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The temperature inside the hut remained brutally cold, and Teresa could not stop shivering despite the blankets. Owen noticed and hesitated, clearly wrestling with a decision, before speaking carefully. "Miss Zimmerman, I know this is inappropriate, but we need to share body heat or we will both freeze to death. I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not take advantage of the situation. I just spent $200 to keep you safe, and I meant it." Teresa studied him in the dim light filtering through gaps in the walls. Everything about this day had shattered her trust in men and family, in the basic decency she thought governed human behavior. Her uncle's betrayal still felt like a knife in her back, made worse because she had lived under his roof for 3 months and believed his promises to care for her after her father died. But freezing to death to preserve some illusion of virtue seemed foolish, and Owen had done nothing but help her since the moment he bid on her. "All right," she said quietly. Owen rearranged the blankets to cover them both, then wrapped an arm around Teresa's shoulders and pulled her against his side. She stiffened at first, but the warmth radiating from his body proved too tempting to resist, and she gradually relaxed against him. He smelled of horses, leather, and wood smoke, familiar frontier scents that reminded her of her father before the influenza took him too. "Tell me about your ranch," Teresa said, needing distraction from the intimacy of their position and the fear that still clawed at her chest. Owen seemed grateful for the conversation. "It is nothing fancy. The cabin has 2 rooms, a main area with the kitchen and living space, and a small bedroom. There is a good well, a barn that needs repair, and about 300 acres of decent grazing land. I have been building the herd slowly, buying cattle when I can afford them and hoping the winters do not kill too many. You run the ranch alone. For now. I had a partner until last year, but he decided to try his luck in the California goldfields and left me to buy him out. I hire help during roundup and branding season, but mostly it is just me and the cattle." Owen paused, then added, "And now you, I suppose, though I have not figured out what that means yet." Teresa appreciated his honesty. "What were you planning to do with me after you won the bid? You spent a fortune you claim you could not afford to save a stranger." "I was not planning anything beyond getting you away from those men. I figured we would sort out the details once you were safe." Owen shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position against the rough wall. "What happened to you, Miss Zimmerman? How did you end up on that auction block?" The question unleashed a flood of bitterness that Teresa had been holding back. "My father died 6 months ago from influenza, same as my mother years before. We had a small farm in Missouri, but the bank foreclosed after he died and I had nowhere to go. My uncle wrote and said I could come stay with him in New Mexico, that he would take care of me like family should. I spent my last money on the train ticket west. But he did not take care of you, Owen said, anger creeping into his voice. He gambled. Every night, playing cards and losing money he did not have. When the debts got too high, he decided I was worth more sold than kept, so he dragged me to that auction before I understood what was happening. Teresa's voice broke on the last words. I have no one left. No family, no home, no money. I do not even know what I am supposed to do now. Owen tightened his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of comfort. You are not alone anymore. I know we just met, and you have every reason not to trust me, but I promise you this. As long as you are under my protection, no one will hurt you or sell you or treat you like anything less than a human being deserving of respect. That is a promise I make on my honor, and I do not break my word. Something in his voice made Teresa believe him. She turned her face against his shoulder and let herself cry properly for the first time since this nightmare began, great shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. Owen held her through it, murmuring quiet reassurances and letting her grief run its course. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep, still wrapped in Owen's arms. Owen remained awake, listening to the storm and thinking about the responsibility he had taken on with that impulsive bid. $200 was half his savings, money he had been planning to use for breeding stock and barn repairs. Now he had a frightened woman depending on him, and no clear idea how to help her beyond providing basic shelter and food. His mother would have known what to say, what to do, but she had died giving birth to his younger sister, and Owen had spent his life in the company of men who solved problems with ropes, horses, and occasionally fists. But looking down at Teresa's tear-stained face, seeing the exhaustion and pain written in every line of her expression, Owen knew he had made the right choice. Whatever complications lay ahead, they paled in comparison to what would have happened if he had let one of those other men buy her. That knowledge settled something in his chest, gave him a sense of purpose beyond just surviving another winter. The storm raged through the night, but inside their makeshift shelter, Owen kept watch while Teresa slept, and for the first time in years, he did not feel quite so alone. Dawn arrived gray and cold, the blizzard finally blowing itself out somewhere around sunrise. Owen woke Teresa gently, giving her space to remember where she was and who he was before speaking. Her eyes held confusion for a moment before clarity returned along with all the painful memories of yesterday. "How are you feeling?" Owen asked, already up and preparing the horses for travel. "Like I froze and thawed," Teresa admitted, pushing stiff limbs to straightness. Every muscle ached from the cold and the brutal ride, and her face felt raw where wind and snow had scoured her skin. But alive. That counts for something. Owen offered her the last of the hardtack and sardines, which she ate mechanically. "We have about 8 more miles to the ranch." The snow has stopped, but there will be drifts and the temperature is still below freezing. "Think you can manage it?" Teresa nodded, though honestly she felt like she could barely manage standing upright. Pride and determination kept her from complaining as Owen helped her mount the roan mare. The morning sun created dazzling reflections off the snow that hurt her eyes, but at least she could see clearly for the first time since leaving Fort Sumner. They rode in silence through a transformed landscape. Snow blanketed everything 3 feet deep in places, broken only by dark shapes of sagebrush and the occasional juniper tree. The Canadian River lay somewhere to their east, a frozen ribbon cutting through the foothills. Owen navigated with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and gully, and gradually Teresa allowed herself to relax in the saddle, Around midday, they crested a rise and Owen pointed ahead. There, that is home. Teresa followed his gesture and saw a small cabin nestled in a shallow valley protected by low hills. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, which struck her as odd until Owen explained he had banked the fire before leaving for town 3 days ago. A barn stood about 50 yards from the cabin, and she could see cattle clustered near a creek that probably fed into the Canadian River during wet seasons. Relief surged through Teresa so powerfully she felt dizzy. Shelter, warmth, safety. The promises Owen had made were materializing before her eyes in the form of that rough cabin and the smoke rising from its chimney. They descended into the valley and the horses picked up their pace, sensing food and rest ahead. Owen dismounted first and helped Teresa down, catching her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Easy. Let me get you inside and then I will deal with the horses." The cabin door was unlocked because Owen had no neighbors for miles and no fear of thieves in such isolated country. He pushed it open and guided Teresa inside, and the warmth hit her like a physical presence. The fire had died to embers, but the cabin retained enough heat to feel like paradise after the brutal cold outside. Teresa stood in the middle of the main room and looked around with growing relief. The space was simple but clean, with a cast iron stove for cooking, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and shelves holding supplies and dishes. A curtain hung across one doorway, presumably separating the bedroom. The floor was packed dirt, but someone had swept it recently and laid down rag rugs in strategic places. "Sit by the fire," Owen instructed, already moving to build up the flames. "I will be back in a few minutes." He disappeared outside to tend the horses, leaving Teresa alone with her thoughts for the first time since the auction. She sank into the rocking chair and held her hands toward the growing fire, watching flames consume the fresh wood Owen had added. The heat made her fingers and toes ache as feeling returned, but she welcomed even the pain because it meant she was alive and safe. True to his word, Owen returned within minutes. He stamped snow from his boots and hung his hat on a peg by the door, then moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Water from a bucket near the stove went into a large pot to heat. He pulled dried beans, salt pork, and an onion from his supplies and started assembling ingredients for soup. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Owen said without turning around. "There is a trunk in the bedroom with some things that might fit." "My sister stayed here for a few months before she got married, and she left some dresses behind." Teresa rose on shaky legs and ducked through the curtained doorway. The bedroom was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and the trunk Owen had mentioned. She opened it and found 3 dresses, all well worn but clean and infinitely better than the torn rag she currently wore. She chose a blue calico that looked about her size, along with warm stockings and undergarments. Changing felt like shedding a skin, and Teresa nearly cried again as she pulled the ruined gray dress over her head and threw it in the corner. That dress represented everything she wanted to forget about yesterday. The blue calico fit reasonably well, a bit loose in the waist but otherwise acceptable, and the warm stockings were pure luxury. When she emerged from the bedroom, Owen had the soup started and coffee brewing. He had changed into dry clothes himself, and his hair stuck up at odd angles where he had run his hands through it. He glanced at Teresa and nodded approval. "Much better. That color suits you." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and offered her one. "The soup will take a few hours, but I have bread and butter if you are hungry now." They ate in comfortable silence, the simple food tasting better than anything Teresa remembered. Owen had good bread, probably bought from someone in Fort Sumner who actually knew how to bake, and the butter was fresh enough to have real flavor. She ate 3 slices before her stomach declared itself satisfied, then cradled the coffee cup and let its warmth seep into her hands. "Mr. Armstrong," she began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. "Owen, just call me Owen. Mr. Armstrong was my father." "Owen, then." Teresa took a breath. "I need to understand what happens now." "You bought me at that auction, which legally makes me your property according to the bill of sale. What exactly do you expect from me?" Owen set down his coffee cup and met her eyes directly. "I expect nothing. That auction was a criminal act dressed up as legal commerce, and I do not recognize any claim of ownership over another human being. You are free to leave whenever you want, though I would ask that you wait until spring when travel is safer. In the meantime, you are welcome to stay here as my guest." "Your guest," Teresa repeated, the word feeling strange. "For free? You spent $200 on me." "I spent $200 to save you from men who would have hurt you. That money is gone, and I do not expect to recoup it." Owen ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up even more. "Look, I know this is an unusual situation, but here is what I am thinking. You need a place to stay, and I could genuinely use help around the ranch. The cabin needs cleaning. I am a terrible cook, and there are 100 small tasks I never get around to because I am always dealing with cattle or repairs. If you wanted to earn your keep by helping with those things, I would appreciate it, and it might make you feel better about accepting charity." Teresa considered this carefully. The offer was generous, far more than she had any right to expect from a stranger. But the thought of being dependent on Owen's charity indefinitely made her uncomfortable, and having specific tasks would give her purpose beyond just surviving. "All right," she said slowly. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden, and do basic medical care if you or the animals get hurt. I am not afraid of hard work. In exchange for room and board, I will help maintain the household and anything else you need that does not require heavy labor." Owen smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face and making him look younger. "That sounds like a fair arrangement. Though I warn you, I am a rough bachelor and my standards for housekeeping are probably lower than yours. Do not feel obligated to scrub everything just because it is dirty. I will scrub what needs scrubbing, and you will be grateful." Teresa shot back, and was surprised to hear the teasing note in her own voice. They spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable silence. Owen worked on repairing a saddle while Teresa explored the cabin, taking stock of supplies and making mental notes about what needed attention. The main room was cluttered but not truly dirty, just disorganized in the way of someone who lived alone and had no one to impress. She found a broom and started sweeping, then organized the shelves while the soup simmered. As evening approached and the temperature dropped further, Owen built up the fire and lit 2 kerosene lamps. The warm light created pockets of coziness in the small space, and Teresa felt herself relaxing for the first time in months. The constant tension she had carried since her father's death began to ease, replaced by something almost like peace. Over soup and more bread, they talked about practical matters. Owen explained the layout of the ranch, the daily tasks that kept him busy, and the challenges of ranching in such isolated country. Teresa told him about growing up in Missouri, her parents, and the small farm that had been her entire world until the bank took it away. "I am sorry about your father," Owen said quietly. "Losing family is hard. I lost my parents young, and it took me years to find my footing again." "How did you end up in New Mexico?" Teresa asked. "Worked a cattle drive from Texas when I was 18. Fell in love with the territory and never left. Spent years working for other ranchers before I saved enough to buy this place." Owen stared into his soup. "It is not much, but it is mine." That means something. Teresa understood that sentiment deeply. Ownership meant security, meant no one could take it away on a whim. She had lost that when the bank foreclosed, and the absence still ached like a missing limb. They finished eating, and Teresa insisted on washing dishes, despite Owen's protests that he would handle it tomorrow. Establishing routine felt important, claiming her place in this household through action rather than just words. Owen let her work, settling into the rocking chair with a book he had been trying to finish for 3 months. When Teresa finally ran out of tasks, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The emotional and physical toll of the past 2 days could not be denied any longer, and she swayed on her feet. Owen noticed immediately. "You need sleep. Take the bedroom, and I will make a pallet out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Teresa protested. "You have already done so much." "The bed has a real mattress and blankets. The floor has my bedroll and the fire. You are taking the bed." Owen's tone brooked no argument, and Teresa was too tired to fight him. She retreated to the bedroom and crawled under the quilts, her body singing with relief as it met the mattress. She thought she would fall asleep immediately, but instead lay awake listening to Owen move around the main room, banking the fire and preparing his makeshift bed. Knowing he was just beyond that thin curtain should have made her nervous, but instead she felt safe in a way she had not experienced since her father died. Sleep claimed her eventually, deep and dreamless. The next weeks fell into a pattern that surprised Teresa with its comfort. She woke before Owen each morning and started coffee and breakfast, simple meals of eggs or oatmeal or leftover beans. Owen would eat quickly and head out to check on the cattle, break ice on the creek so they could drink, and handle the 100 tasks that kept the ranch running. Teresa would clean, mend clothes, organize supplies, and plan meals using the limited ingredients available. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, sharing stories from their lives with increasing openness. Owen told her about working cattle drives, about stampedes and river crossings and the endless dust. Teresa described growing up on a Missouri farm, her mother's garden, her father's laugh. They carefully avoided topics that hurt too much, like the auction or Owen's parents' deaths, but the conversation still created connection. Teresa found herself watching Owen more than was probably appropriate. He moved with a quiet confidence she admired, never rushing but always accomplishing what needed doing. His hands were scarred from rope burns and barbed wire, but gentle when he helped her lift heavy pots or reach high shelves. He treated her with unfailing respect, never crowding her space or making demands, and that restraint made her trust him more with each passing day. Owen was equally aware of Teresa, though he tried not to let it show. She brought life to the cabin in ways he had not anticipated. The sound of her singing while she worked made the space feel like home instead of just shelter. Her cooking was leagues better than his burned attempts, and he caught himself looking forward to meals just for the excuse to sit across from her. The way lamplight caught in her brown hair distracted him when he was trying to read, and he had to force his attention back to the page. A month after Teresa's arrival, a warm spell melted much of the snow, and Owen took the opportunity to ride into Fort Bascom, the nearest settlement north of his ranch. He needed supplies and wanted to check if there was any mail, though he received letters rarely. Teresa stayed behind, using the time alone to thoroughly clean the cabin and wash every piece of fabric she could find. Owen returned at dusk, his saddlebags full of flour, sugar, coffee, and other essentials, but his expression was troubled as he dismounted. "What is wrong?" Teresa asked, coming out to help unload supplies. "I heard news in town. Your uncle is looking for you. He is claiming I stole his property and that he is owed the $200 I paid plus the value of lost goods. Owen's jaw was tight with anger. He has been spreading this story in Fort Sumner and other towns, trying to get the law involved. Terror clutched Teresa's chest. Can he do that? Can he force me to go back? Not if I have anything to say about it. But the law in these territories is complicated and often enforced by whoever has the most money or friends. Owen carried the supplies inside and began unpacking them with sharp, angry movements. I am not going to let him take you, Teresa. But we might need to make things more difficult for him legally. How? Owen stopped moving and turned to face her, his expression serious. We could get married. If you are my wife, your uncle has no claim on you whatsoever. A man's wife is his concern, and no one can challenge that without serious cause. The words hung in the air between them. Marriage. To a man she had known for only a month, a man who had saved her but remained in many ways a stranger. Teresa's heart pounded as she considered the implications. That is a huge step, she said carefully. Marriage is permanent. It is. And I am not proposing because I am in love with you or expecting you to share my bed or any of that. Owen's voice was steady, but his eyes held something she could not quite read. I am proposing a practical arrangement to protect you. We would be married in name, giving you legal protection, but everything else could stay the same as it is now. Separate sleeping arrangements, no expectations beyond what we already have. I would never force you into anything you did not want. Teresa turned away, her mind racing. The offer was generous and terrifying in equal measure. Marriage to Owen meant safety from her uncle, legal status, a permanent home. But it also meant binding herself to a man she barely knew, committing to a future she could not predict. Yet what other choice did she have? Where else could she go with no money, no family, and winter still gripping the territory? Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Owen resumed unpacking supplies, giving her space to process. Teresa spent a sleepless night wrestling with the decision. She trusted Owen more than she had trusted anyone since her father died, but trust and marriage were different things entirely. Yet as she lay in the darkness listening to him snore softly in the next room, she realized something had already shifted in her heart. She cared about Owen in ways that went beyond gratitude for his protection. She liked his quiet strength, his honesty, his kindness to the animals and to her. The thought of building a life with him did not feel like a trap, but rather like a possibility worth exploring. In the morning, she found him feeding the horses and announced her decision before she could second-guess herself. I will marry you. Owen turned from measuring oats, surprise clear on his face. You are sure? As sure as I can be about anything right now. You are right that it will protect me from my uncle, and I think we work well together. I know it is not a real marriage in the romantic sense, but maybe that is better. We can build something practical and honest without all the messy emotions that make people stupid. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, an emotion Teresa could not identify before he shuttered it away. All right then. We can ride into Fort Bascom next week and find a preacher. In the meantime, we should probably get to know each other better. Ask me anything you want to know. They spent the next days in long conversations, sharing details about their lives and beliefs and dreams. Teresa learned that Owen had always wanted a family but never found the right woman, that he dreamed of building his ranch into something substantial to pass down to future generations, that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching. Owen discovered that Teresa had a sharp wit hidden beneath her caution, that she could handle rifles and rope as well as any ranch hand, thanks to her father's teaching, that she yearned for stability more than romance or adventure. The more they talked, the more Teresa felt she had made the right choice. Owen was a good man in ways that went beyond simple kindness. He treated her as an equal partner, asking her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listening to her answers. He made her laugh with dry observations about the absurdities of frontier life. And when she woke from nightmares about the auction, thrashing and crying out in the darkness, he was there with gentle reassurance and hot tea until she calmed. They rode into Fort Bascom on a cold but clear morning, both wearing their best clothes. Owen had a dark suit he saved for rare occasions, and Teresa wore one of his sister's nicer dresses, a green wool that fit well enough after some quick alterations. The preacher, a Methodist circuit rider named Dawson who happened to be passing through town, agreed to perform the ceremony in the small church for $5. The wedding took 10 minutes. They stood before Preacher Dawson while he read the traditional vows, and Teresa felt the weight of each word as she promised to love, honor, and obey until death parted them. Owen's voice was steady as he made the same promises, and when Dawson pronounced them man and wife, Owen kissed her cheek rather than her lips, maintaining the boundaries they had agreed upon. They signed the marriage certificate, and Dawson provided a copy, official proof that Teresa Zimmerman was now Teresa Armstrong, wife of Owen Armstrong of Fort Bascom, New Mexico Territory. She stared at her new name on the paper and felt the fundamental shift it represented in her identity and status. "How does it feel to be married?" Owen asked as they rode back toward the ranch. "Strange, final, safe." Teresa folded the marriage certificate carefully and tucked it inside her coat. "Thank you for doing this. You do not need to thank me. We are helping each other." But Owen's expression was complicated, as though he wanted to say more but had no words for it. Back at the ranch, they fell into their established routine with only small changes. Teresa now wore a simple gold band Owen had purchased in Fort Bascom, a visible symbol of her married status. She signed her name Teresa Armstrong when writing a letter to a distant cousin in Missouri, still marveling at how strange it looked. But they still slept in separate spaces, still maintained polite distance, still treated each other with careful respect. Winter released its grip slowly, and as March arrived and the snow melted, the ranch came alive with new demands. Cattle that had survived the harsh months needed checking for injuries and illness. Fences required repair where ice and wind had damaged them. The garden plot needed preparing for spring planting. Owen and Teresa worked from dawn until long after dark, their partnership strengthening through shared labor. One evening in early April, Teresa was planting vegetable seeds in the newly turned garden soil when Owen approached with news. "I need to drive 20 head to Fort Sumner to sell. The buyer wants them delivered by the end of the month. It will take me about 4 days round trip." The thought of Owen returning to Fort Sumner, where her uncle might still be spreading his lies, made Teresa anxious. "Is that safe? What if my uncle causes trouble?" "I will have the marriage certificate with me. Legally, he has no claim on you now." Owen crouched beside her, his gloved hands reaching to help plant seeds. "But I worry about leaving you here alone for 4 days. Can you handle the place by yourself?" Teresa bristled at the suggestion she could not manage. "I grew up on a farm. I know how to feed animals, milk cows, and shoot a rifle if needed. I will be fine." Owen accepted this with a nod, and Teresa appreciated that he did not coddle her. 3 days later, he rode out before dawn with 20 cattle and his horse, promising to return as quickly as possible. Teresa stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned back to face the empty cabin. The first day passed quickly, filled with chores and tasks. The second day dragged, and Teresa found herself jumping at shadows, imagining threats in every sound. But the third day brought genuine trouble. She was feeding the chickens when she heard horses approaching and looked up to see 3 riders cresting the ridge. Her uncle was in the lead, his florid face unmistakable even at a distance. 2 other men flanked him, rough-looking types who were clearly hired muscle rather than law enforcement. Teresa's heart hammered as she dropped the feed bucket and ran for the cabin, slamming the door and grabbing the rifle Owen kept loaded above the mantel. "Teresa!" Her uncle's voice carried clearly as the riders approached. "Come out here, girl. Time to stop this foolishness and return home." Teresa positioned herself at the window, rifle steady despite her shaking hands. "I am not going anywhere with you. You sold me like an animal, and I will see you in hell before I trust you again." Her uncle dismounted, and his 2 companions followed suit. "That cowboy filled your head with nonsense. You belong to me by right of family, and I aim to collect what is owed. $200 he stole from me, taking you away like that. He bought me fair in an auction you arranged. And now I am his wife, legally married with papers filed in Fort Bascom. You have no claim on me." Teresa pulled back the hammer on the rifle, the metallic click loud in the quiet morning. "Leave my property or I will defend it." One of the hired men, a heavy-set brute with a scar across his jaw, laughed. "You expect us to be scared of a woman with a rifle? Come on, girl. Put that down before you hurt yourself." Teresa aimed carefully and fired, the bullet kicking up dirt 3 feet in front of the man's boots. The report echoed across the valley and the horses shied nervously. All 3 men froze, reassessing the situation. "The next one goes through your knee," Teresa said, already working the lever to chamber another round. "My father taught me to shoot before I could write my name, and at this range I do not miss. Leave now." Her uncle's face purpled with rage. "You ungrateful little witch, after I gave you a home when you had nothing. You gave me 3 months of false promises before selling me to pay your debts. That is not charity, that is cruelty. Now get off my land before my husband returns and shoots all 3 of you for trespassing." The men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Facing an angry woman with a rifle was not what they had expected, and the legal protection of marriage complicated their plans. Teresa's uncle tried one more time, his voice turning wheedling. "Teresa, be reasonable. We are family. If that cowboy stole you without proper payment, I am entitled to compensation. Just tell him to pay what is owed and we will call it settled." He paid $200 in front of witnesses. The auctioneer in Fort Sumner can confirm it if you bother to ask instead of lying. "And I am done speaking with you. Leave now or face the consequences." Her uncle stared at her for a long moment, hatred and greed warring in his expression. Finally, he spat on the ground and remounted his horse. "This is not over, girl. I will see you regret this defiance. I only regret believing you were anything like the brother my father loved." Teresa kept the rifle trained on them as they turned their horses and rode back the way they came, not lowering it until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she start shaking in earnest, the adrenaline crash making her legs weak. She sank onto the porch steps and clutched the rifle, tears of reaction streaming down her face. She had stood up to the man who had betrayed her most cruelly, had defended herself and Owen's property, and had survived. But the fear lingered, along with the knowledge that her uncle might return with more men or different tactics. Owen returned late the next afternoon to find Teresa still on edge, jumping at every sound. She told him what had happened and showed him where she had fired the warning shot, the disturbed earth still visible. Owen listened with growing anger, his jaw tight. "I should have been here," he said flatly. If they had tried to take you by force or hurt you while I was gone, I would never forgive myself. But they did not because I was armed and ready. I am not some helpless girl who needs constant protection." Teresa crossed her arms. "Though I will admit it was terrifying and I barely slept last night." Owen stepped closer, and for the first time since their marriage, he pulled her into a full embrace. Teresa stiffened in surprise before relaxing against his chest, accepting the comfort he offered. He smelled of trail dust and cattle, familiar scents that meant safety. His heart beat steady beneath her ear, and gradually her own racing pulse calmed to match it. "You were incredibly brave," Owen said quietly. "And you are right that you are not helpless. But that does not mean you should have to face threats alone. We are partners now, Teresa. Your fights are my fights." Something shifted in Teresa's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical comfort and everything to do with the man holding her. She pulled back to look at his face and saw concern and pride mixed together in his expression. Without thinking too hard about it, she stood on her toes and kissed him properly for the first time. Not the chaste peck from their wedding, but a real kiss that conveyed everything she had been afraid to acknowledge. Owen went very still for a heartbeat before responding, his arms tightening around her as he kissed her back with careful intensity. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, his gray eyes searched her face with a question he did not voice. "I know we agreed this would be a practical arrangement," Teresa said, her hand still gripping his shirt. "But I have come to care for you, Owen Armstrong, more than is probably wise for a marriage of convenience." "There is nothing convenient about what I feel for you," Owen replied, his voice rough. "I have been trying to be honorable and respect our agreement, but Teresa, you have occupied my thoughts and heart from that first moment I saw you on that auction block. If you are saying you want this to be a real marriage in every sense, then I am more than willing." Teresa kissed him again in response, and this kiss held promise and heat, and all the emotion they had been carefully restraining for weeks. When they finally came up for air, Owen laughed and swung her in a circle, joy transforming his usually serious face. That night, Teresa moved her belongings from the bedroom into Owen's space by the fire. They built up the flames and spread blankets, creating a nest where they could finally explore the attraction that had been building between them. Owen was gentle and patient, giving Teresa time to adjust and overcome her nerves, and when they came together, it felt like a promise being sealed with bodies as well as words. Afterward, lying in Owen's arms with firelight painting shadows on the walls, Teresa felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. This was home. This man was home. The practical arrangement had transformed into something rare and precious, a love built on mutual respect and shared hardship. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Owen replied immediately. "I have loved you since you looked at that auctioneer with fire in your eyes despite being terrified. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and I thank God every day that I was in Fort Sumner when you needed help." They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. Owen wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy the adjacent property if it ever came available. Teresa wanted a real vegetable garden and chickens that laid enough eggs to sell in town. They both wanted children eventually, a family to fill the cabin with noise and life. The future stretched before them full of possibility, and for the first time since her father died, Teresa felt hope. Spring progressed into summer, and the ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Teresa's garden produced abundant vegetables that she canned and preserved for winter. Owen added 20 more cattle to his herd and began planning for a proper barn expansion. They worked side by side through long days, and fell into bed exhausted and happy each night. In June, Teresa realized her monthly cycle had not come and recognized the signs her body was sending. She told Owen over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I think I am pregnant." Owen froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, then slowly set it down. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Teresa twisted her napkin nervously. "I know we talked about children eventually, but this is sooner than we planned." "Teresa, this is wonderful news." Owen came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I know it will be hard, especially with winter coming again, but we will figure it out together. We always do." Relief flooded through Teresa and she pulled him close. "I was worried you might think it was too soon." "There is no such thing as too soon for good things." Owen kissed her thoroughly and Teresa laughed against his mouth, joy bubbling up inside her. They rode into Fort Bascom to see the doctor, who confirmed what Teresa already knew. She was about 2 months along, due in late January or early February. The doctor gave her instructions about nutrition and rest, most of which Teresa already knew from watching her mother through pregnancies that had ended in miscarriages after Teresa's birth. As summer gave way to fall, Teresa's body changed visibly. Her belly swelled with the growing life inside her, and Owen treated her like spun glass, constantly worried she would overexert herself. Teresa found this both endearing and irritating, insisting she could still do most of her normal work despite his protests. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him after he tried to forbid her from carrying water buckets. "I am pregnant, not dying. Let me help." They compromised, with Owen taking over the heaviest tasks while Teresa focused on cooking, preserving food for winter, and preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes from fabric Owen bought in town, marveling at how small the garments looked. Owen built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until the surface felt smooth as silk, and painted it a soft cream color. In October, Teresa's uncle made one last attempt to cause trouble. He appeared in Fort Bascom with a lawyer from Santa Fe, claiming the marriage was invalid because Teresa had been his legal ward at the time. The lawyer argued that Owen had essentially kidnapped his client's property, and any subsequent marriage was therefore void. Owen hired his own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Hendricks, who had moved west from Philadelphia. Hendricks tore apart the uncle's case in front of a visiting circuit judge, pointing out that wardship required legal documentation which did not exist, that the auction itself had been illegal trafficking in human beings, and that Teresa had been legally an adult at the time capable of making her own decisions about marriage. The judge ruled in Owen and Teresa's favor, ordering her uncle to pay court costs and issuing a restraining order forbidding him from approaching either of them again. Teresa, who had insisted on attending the hearing despite being 7 months pregnant, felt vindication surge through her as the gavel came down. "It is finally over," she said to Owen as they left the courthouse. "He cannot hurt us anymore." "It was over the moment you became my wife," Owen replied, his hand protective on the small of her back. "But I am glad the law has confirmed it officially." Winter arrived hard and fast in late November, and by December the ranch was buried in snow again. But this time, Teresa viewed the isolation differently. Instead of being trapped, they were cocooned together in their small cabin, preparing for the arrival of their child. Owen kept the fire blazing constantly and checked on the cattle morning and night, but otherwise stayed close to home in case Teresa needed him. She went into labor on a bitter cold night in late January, 2 weeks before the doctor had predicted. Owen had been reading aloud from a novel when Teresa gasped and clutched her belly, feeling the first contraction tear through her. "It is time," she said, and saw Owen go pale. "But the doctor is in Fort Bascom. I cannot get there and back in less than 6 hours, and that is if I do not freeze to death in the storm." Panic edged his voice. "Then you are going to have to deliver this baby yourself." Teresa spoke with more confidence than she felt. "My mother told me about her experiences before she died. I can talk you through it." Owen looked terrified but determined. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and prepared the bedroom while Teresa breathed through increasingly intense contractions. The labor lasted 8 hours, a grueling test of endurance that left Teresa exhausted and screaming. Owen stayed beside her the entire time, following her instructions and offering encouragement even though his own fear was visible. Just before dawn, their son entered the world with a furious cry that filled the cabin. Owen caught him with shaking hands, and Teresa wept with relief as he placed the baby on her chest. Their son had dark hair like Teresa and what looked like it might be Owen's gray eyes, though it was hard to tell. He was perfect and healthy and theirs. "We made this," Teresa whispered, stroking the baby's tiny head. "We made a whole person." Owen kissed her forehead, tears streaming down his face. "You are amazing. I have never been more in awe of anyone in my life." They named him Daniel, after Owen's father, and he became the center of their universe. The weeks after his birth were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn. But Teresa had never been happier, watching Owen cradle their son with infinite gentleness or sing off-key lullabies when Daniel fussed. Spring came again, and with it new growth and possibility. Owen's herd had survived the winter well, and cattle prices were high enough to finally make a decent profit. Teresa's garden flourished under her care, and Daniel grew fat and happy on her milk. They took him into Fort Bascom for the doctor to examine, and received confirmation that he was thriving. Life settled into a new rhythm that incorporated their son into every aspect. Teresa wore Daniel in a sling while she worked, and Owen fashioned a special carrier he could use when checking cattle. They introduced him to the horses and chickens, letting him experience the ranch that would be his inheritance. Years passed in steady progression, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. They added 2 more children, a daughter named Emma with Teresa's brown hair and a son named Matthew who had Owen's serious nature. The cabin grew crowded and Owen built an addition, adding 2 more rooms so the children could have their own space. The ranch prospered as Owen's reputation for quality cattle spread. He hired seasonal workers during busy times, and Teresa managed the household and garden with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. They faced hard times too, drought years and cattle diseases and seasons when money grew tight, but they weathered every storm together. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the foothills, Teresa reflected on how far they had come from that terrible day in Fort Sumner. She was 35 now, with strands of gray appearing in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Owen sat beside her, weathered and strong, their hands interlinked on the bench between them. Their 3 children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked suddenly. "Marrying me, I mean. I know it was not exactly a romantic beginning." Teresa squeezed his hand. "I regret nothing. You saved my life in that auction house, and then you gave me a home, a family, and love I never imagined I would find. Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard days, especially the hard days. Those are the ones that proved we could survive anything as long as we were together." Teresa leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Owen Armstrong, more with each passing year." I love you too. You are my heart, Teresa. Everything good in my life stems from the moment I decided to bid on you. Owen turned and kissed her properly, the kind of kiss that still made her pulse race after 15 years of marriage. Their children made gagging sounds and complained that their parents were being embarrassing, which only made Owen and Teresa laugh and kiss more dramatically. This was their life, built from nothing but determination, trust, and love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Armstrong family headed inside for dinner. The cabin was warm and full of life, filled with the noise and chaos of children, the smell of Teresa's cooking, and the comfortable presence of two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and created something beautiful together. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Owen and Teresa lay in bed talking about plans for the future. Daniel was 12 now and showing real aptitude for ranching, already helping Owen with serious tasks. Emma had her mother's green thumb and had taken over much of the garden work. Matthew, at 8, was the dreamer of the family, always reading or drawing pictures of the mountains. "We have been blessed," Teresa said softly. "Sometimes I think about that girl standing on the auction block, terrified and alone, and I can barely recognize her as me. You changed everything, Owen. You gave me my life back." "We saved each other," Owen corrected. "I was just surviving before you came along, going through motions without real purpose. You made this ranch into a home and gave me a family worth working for. Everything I have accomplished, I did it for you and our children." They made love slowly, taking their time to appreciate each other with the comfortable intimacy of long marriage. Afterward, Teresa drifted toward sleep wrapped in Owen's arms, feeling safe and cherished and loved. The following summer brought unexpected news. A rider appeared at the ranch with a letter from a lawyer in Missouri. Teresa's distant cousin had died and left her a small inheritance, $500 that had been held in trust. The money was not life-changing, but it represented a final severing of ties to her old life and acknowledgement that she had survived and thrived despite everything. Teresa and Owen decided to use the money to buy the neighboring property that had just come up for sale. The additional 300 acres would allow them to expand the herd significantly and provide security for their children's futures. Owen hired a crew to build a proper barn and bunkhouse, modernizing the ranch into a real operation that could employ workers year-round. Daniel turned 15 and announced he wanted to be a rancher like his father, and Owen began teaching him the business side of cattle raising along with the practical skills. Emma, at 13, had started helping Teresa with more complex preserving and cooking, and showed interest in one day running her own household. Matthew, now 11, remained the family intellectual, but even he pitched in with chores and never complained about the work. One autumn evening, a familiar figure appeared at the ranch. Preacher Dawson, the circuit rider who had married Owen and Teresa 16 years ago, stopped by on his rounds through the territory. They invited him to dinner and spent the evening catching up, telling him about their children and the growth of their ranch. "I remember your wedding," Dawson said, smiling at the memory. "You both looked so serious and uncertain. I wondered if you would make it work." "We almost did not in the beginning," Owen admitted. "It took time to turn a practical arrangement into a real marriage. The best marriages are built on friendship and respect as much as passion," Dawson observed. "You two have clearly found all three." Teresa felt grateful for this unexpected visit, this reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. She looked around the table at her husband and children, at the home they had built together, and felt overwhelming thankfulness for the twist of fate that had brought Owen into her life. As the children grew older, the ranch continued to expand. Daniel married at 21, bringing home a capable young woman named Sarah who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the far end of the property, and Daniel took over more of the daily operations, allowing Owen to step back slightly from the most demanding physical work. Emma married at 19, choosing a young lawyer from Fort Bascom who treated her like a queen. They settled in town but visited the ranch frequently, and Emma remained close to her mother, often seeking advice about managing her household and eventually her own children. Matthew surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, moving to Santa Fe to attend college before returning to open a school in Fort Bascom. He never married, finding fulfillment in educating the next generation, but he remained a devoted son and uncle who spent summers at the ranch helping with whatever needed doing. Teresa and Owen aged gracefully into their 50s and then 60s, silver-haired and slower-moving but still sharp-minded and deeply in love. They had grandchildren now, 7 in total, who treated the ranch as their playground and learned the same lessons about hard work and integrity that their parents had absorbed. One evening in their 63rd year, Teresa and Owen sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The ranch sprawled before them, prosperous and well-maintained, the product of 43 years of marriage and partnership. Their bodies ached more than they used to and they moved carefully, mindful of aging joints and muscles, but their connection remained as strong as ever. "Do you remember the blizzard?" Teresa asked suddenly. "That ride from Fort Sumner when we thought we might freeze to death?" "I remember everything about those first days," Owen replied. "I remember how brave you were, standing up to that auctioneer. I remember holding you in that ruined hut and thinking I had never met anyone stronger. I remember deciding in that moment that I would do whatever it took to keep you safe." "You kept your promise," Teresa said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single day for 43 years, you have kept me safe and loved and happy. I am the luckiest woman alive. I am the lucky one. You took a rough bachelor and turned him into a husband and father. You built a home from nothing and filled it with love." Owen reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "If I had to live my life over, I would not change a single thing as long as it meant finding you again." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. 3 generations of Armstrongs lived on this land now, all descended from 2 people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful together. Teresa thought about that terrified girl on the auction block, certain her life was over, unable to imagine that salvation would come in the form of a cowboy with gray eyes and a good heart. If she could go back and tell that girl what the future held, would she believe it? A loving husband, 3 wonderful children, grandchildren who adored her, a prosperous ranch, and a lifetime of happiness. It seemed too good to be true, the kind of ending that only existed in storybooks. But it was real. Every moment of joy and struggle, every challenge overcome, every victory celebrated. Real in the way their children's laughter echoed across the valley. Real in the weight of Owen's hand in hers. Real in the satisfaction of looking at land they had nurtured and seeing it flourish. "I love you," Teresa said, turning to face her husband in the fading light. "Then, now, always." "I love you too," Owen replied, and kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown her on that first night in his cabin when she had been broken and afraid, and he had offered nothing but protection and respect. They went inside as darkness fell, closing the door on another day in a lifetime of days. The cabin had grown and changed over the years, modernized with glass windows and purchased furniture, and all the little improvements that came with prosperity. But the heart of it remained the same, a place where two people had learned to trust and love and build a future together. Teresa prepared a simple dinner while Owen lit lamps, their movements synchronized by decades of partnership. They ate at the same table where they had shared their first meal as husband and wife, and talked about small things with the comfortable intimacy of old friends. That night, lying in bed with Owen's arms around her, Teresa reflected on the strange path her life had taken. From the farm in Missouri to her father's death, from her uncle's betrayal to that terrible auction, from the blizzard ride to this warm bed in a home filled with love. Every hardship had led her here, to this man and this life, and she would not trade it for anything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Owen asked sleepily. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for buying my freedom when you could have walked away, for loving me when I had nothing to offer but hope." Owen tightened his arms around her. "You have always had everything to offer, Teresa. I just had the good fortune to recognize it when others could not." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had started as strangers bound by circumstance and become soulmates by choice. Outside, the New Mexico night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the black sky. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. On the porch, the rocking chair moved gently in the breeze. And inside the Armstrong home, love kept watch through another night, as it had for 43 years and would for all the years to come. The end.